Hello and welcome to Fidelity Connects, a Fidelity Investments Canada podcast, connecting you to the world of investing and helping you stay ahead. Joining us today to delve deeper into the shifting tides of Canada's economy is economist and futurist Linda Nazareth. Linda is a former Senior Economist with CIBC and a current Senior Fellow for Economics and Population Change with the MacDonald-Laurier Institute. Canada's economic and labor landscape is continually evolving, and today they are significantly influenced by two major factors, AI and the green transition. So, how might these factors be influencing how companies operate? What impact might this have on certain industries, investment decisions, and how we work? We'll unpack this and more today with Linda and host Pamela Ritchie. And for context, this podcast was recorded on August 1st, 2024.
Warm welcome to you, Linda. Great to see you.
Great to see you too, Pamela.
Great to have you here, joining us here in studio. I'd love to begin with the labor component of all of this and ultimately why climate change, which we're watching unfold in real time, it appears, is linked with jobs, particularly. Where do we make the link there?
You know, we don't think about this enough, but it's really correlated. I mean, at the most basic level, when it gets really hot, there are some jobs that really aren't practical. I mean, if you're outside working, there's an upper limit to what you can stand. But way beyond that, we saw a couple of years ago in London when it got really hot, the train tracks buckled, people couldn't get to work. We are going to have to see buildings redesigned to deal with how weather's changing, and that will impact how people work. We need different skills because we have all these climate goals, and it's going to be difficult to get there. So there's a lot to look at.
It's an interesting moment in Canada, all over the place. We hear about infrastructure investment. We hear about sort of this being a jumping off point for starting a bit of a new industrial revolution. We'll get to AI in a minute and sort of based on that. But I guess timing wise, is it an interesting time to think about those things? I mean, we're going to go along, it looks like, redesign some things anyway.
Interesting or unfortunate or fortunate really depends on your point of view, and we don't know how it'll all come together. But look, we've talked a lot about a demographic transition. That's happening. We've talked about technological change, the AI revolution. That's happening so quickly. And on top of that, we have a planet that's changing. We have set these goals in terms of climate and net zero that we're trying to get to, and it seems like the world's not waiting for us to figure it out. We have all these weather events happening. So it is all happening at the same time, and it means business has to step up to it.
Are there some examples where areas of the country, businesses, sectors have improved and are sort of ready for it? So I'm thinking of, I don't know, the agriculture is prepared for it in X, Y, and Z ways. Are there any examples of how there has been an adjustment to ready a sector or company or business for changing climates?
Well, honestly, the industries that get maligned the most, the energy sector and the resource sector in general, are the ones who've at least started this. Right? They realize there's a transition going on. They have changed how they do things in terms of using machinery, investing, in terms of their labor component. So they're partway there. I mean, others haven't changed at all. And you know, there's no industry I could say that will not have to change.
It's fascinating you say that, because I've always thought that the massive amounts of sort of innovation within Canada's oil patch towards making sure that they have a better environmental footprint have been rather massive and not very well telegraphed. Am I right on that?
I think you are. I think it's a PR problem, or they just get all the blame anyway, so people expect them to do this. But at least
it's a good story to tell, actually.
It is. I mean, you can say it's enough or not enough, or they've done the right or wrong things, but they've done things, right? It's the beginning of a transition. And again, every other industry will have to make this transition too.
What industries are feeling it the most right now? I mean, we could say we're sitting inside a building in downtown Toronto. We're not really feeling this. I mean, come on. We're not actually.
Yet. And okay, I think tourism is feeling this. I mean, look at Jasper. This is a terrible story. This is
Can't look away from Jasper.
I was there not that long ago doing a keynote presentation. Lots of conferences go there. And now I think people are looking at this and saying, well, is this a good idea? There's all these fires. Is this a place I want to book my holiday? Now you may say there's not a lot of places that are going to be totally safe. But that was very, very frightening. I'm glad it's not completely destroyed, but it's destroyed a lot more than any of us would like to see.
Massive amount of rebuilding. Again, opportunities to do this in a different way. There would have to be some retraining. So if you're going to have people looking into an economy in a different way to make sure it's positioning companies to be somewhat climate resilient, there's a massive amount of retraining that would need to go on there. Can we sort of begin to pull at the threads of that? What would that entail? This is going to come from the policy angle. How would this get workers from A to B to be more climate positive to the climate, I guess, is the way.
And it's a good question. It's something companies need to start thinking about too. And some, of course, have, some have not. There are things like people who would be leaving the resource sector as petroleum engineers. If they can't find work exactly as that, do they retrain in some environmental specialty? It can be done. It might take some effort, but those are great skills, so you use them elsewhere. There are others with different skills who might have a harder time. Somebody who had a traditional manufacturing job may not find it as easy to get a job at the same pay level in some of the newer industries. And that's, I don't know if it's a role for business, it should be. It maybe is a role for government. It maybe is a role for the educational institutions to figure out how we're going to do this. And then there's new skills too, right? We need green skills in general.
Okay, so let's dig into what those are in just a minute. I just wanted to ask you about the trend. You're an Uber economist, so I know I can throw any of these things at you. This trend of, is it a trend, a necessity? I don't know, reshoring. The idea that manufacturing is coming back to North America in many different ways. We spoke to a portfolio manager not so long ago on this show, saying that actually the reshoring will be very good for Canada because the US will want to have proximity to manufacturing that's in the country next door, like Canada. That's an opportunity to do things, build things,
yes,
in a more green-friendly way.
Absolutely. And the technology is different now than it was 2 years ago, but certainly 10 or 20 years ago. So hopefully we make good decisions, but you need to be able to spend the money to make this happen, right?
On permitting, on what, everything?
Capital, right? Just in general. That's what
Yep.
happens with Canada. Sometimes we don't see the productivity gains because it's difficult to access the capital and make this happen. So I hope we do this.
Okay. So where is that capital? Who's being pushed to do it? Is it companies spending it? Is this government spending?
I think it's companies.
It's companies.
But you need the right financing. You need banks to say yes to loans. You need the right interest rates.
You need incentives.
You do, and you also need to know what you want to do and decide you're going to do it. I think Canadian companies are there, or they're close to there, but everyone is cautious. I mean, this is an environment that has made people cautious. How much do you invest? What's the right move as we transition? There's a lot of things going on.
Is there a grand policy that's needed?
Arguably there are some policies out there, but I think a lot more needs to be done now. At the government level, yes, but also at the firm level. I think we're early stages. Some companies are very aware of this, even in terms of, meeting their targets, but even in terms of hiring the people they want, right? They have a plan for this, realizing the skills they may not need and figuring a plan for that too, and some are further behind.
The industries we talk a lot more about, Canada's always been minerals, oil, everything rich. This is an area that will be developed. There's also a reshoring element to it. Again, how does that sort of contribute to the overall climate story and maybe the reorienting of the labor force? Many of the large emitters are those that are on the mineral side or on sort of the commodity side of the table.
Yeah, and we will see the transition there, absolutely. But it's naive for us to think that it won't be every company, right?
It won't be every company.
Yeah, I think it will be every company, every sector. I do a lot of these keynotes, and sometimes I use the example of orchestras. And you think an orchestra, like who cares about climate if you're in an orchestra? Well, how do you think you move people from city to city? What kind of carbon footprint is that? What kind of carbon footprint is it to bring a conductor even in? They play in these concert halls that are not nearly constructed. They weren't constructed in terms of saving energy and being green. Do we rethink all of those? And if an orchestra, if that industry has to restructure, what about everybody else?
Well, what will be the moment that sort of forces us? It sort of becomes that necessity is the mother of innovation type thing. I mean, what do you see? Massive fire, massive flooding. So is it happening?
I hope it's not more massive fires and lots more floods and weather events. But I think that's happening everywhere. That's it's hard to go to a place where airline travel hasn't been disrupted by a weather event, right? Every time you get on a plane in coming years, will you think about this a lot more? Again, I'd like to think we'll be proactive, particularly in Canada, and we won't wait for more things to happen, but it's getting late for that.
What are green skills? How many of them are being taught in universities? Is there a demand? Is there, again, sort of some version of incentives to get students in to learn about what are green skills? What are we talking about?
There's no real agreement as to what green skills are. There's a couple of ways to look at it. It could be somebody who is studying to be a climate change analyst, environmental policy analyst. Absolutely, that's green skills. It could be anybody who works in an industry like that, whether or not their own job is green. It could be somebody within a traditional industry who is doing a green job, even though they're in an industry that's not considered green. There have been some calculations on this, and International Monetary Fund or World Economic Forum has looked at this, and they said Canada is a little bit above average on this, about 22%. Globally, it is, OECD actually, is about 20%.
Okay.
So, we're a little bit further along, but when you think about this, every company is going to need these skills. If you have a board, they're going to want to know about the environmental footprint, what they should be doing, how to make policy. Well, who's going to brief them? How many companies have the right people in place to really tell them what's going on and what the carbon footprint is within the industry?
So that's a really interesting piece that in a way fits with the labor story, but it's very much the trickle down from the top. It's the leadership story within. What do you see there right now in terms of leadership at companies, including this as a component? In a way, it felt like voices were a bit stronger a couple of years ago.
I like to think that there is the will to change this, that people don't want to be destroying the earth, because it doesn't make sense from a business point of view, right? If you're going to have wildfires taking down a town, that is not bringing in business. So I think everybody would like to fix this. Again, I don't know that everyone has the right plan in place, the right skills in place, is putting enough resources towards this. We'll see how it all comes together. I mean, what we see now is kind of clumsy attempts after the fact, right?
Well, and that leads to greenwashing, which is a very difficult sort of branding to get for any sort of company or anyone speaking about it, because it just is not authentic, or it appears to not be authentic. So again, how do you sort of maneuver to make progress not being labeled that? It has to be more authentic, I guess.
Oh, absolutely, especially if you want to hire younger people. Like Gen Z is not going to fall for we're a green company when they know you're not.
Right.
And whatever happens with the economy, you may say there's not that much demand right now or whatever else, you're going to need those people, those skills, that mindset. And if given a choice, those workers are going to go to the companies where their values are in sync with the values of the company. Right. You see it more when the economy's hot and they have the choice, but it's not going away.
And in terms of reputation, this is often what things will turn on, isn't it? Some event will happen to the company itself, and that will spark, a reaction and perhaps reallocating their own resources within and shuffling things around. Is there either an example or just sort of a sector-specific story that, again, leads to where you see that change either happening, or I'm thinking kind of the supply chain story. Like that's where some will point to.
Yeah, and we are seeing the circular economy being talked about far more. Just in general, Pamela, if you look at the financial statements put out by any company, they talk about the risks with environment right at the top, right? Yep. If you look at even Alphabet, Google, they talk about heat in the California data centers being a risk, right?
And they need cooling.
They need cooling. If you look at some of say the farm equipment manufacturers, even in Asia or whatever, they say, well, you know what, if there's drought, that's a problem. If you look at financial institutions, and sometimes it's broadcast, sometimes it isn't, there's huge risk there.
Because of how they're lending.
Yes, and if you have a flood taking out a
Your
city or
client,
whatever your
yeah.
client. I mean, we know this has taken down insurance companies in the past, and how much more is the risk now? So the Federal Reserve is asking banks on Wall Street to look at this, lenders. The Bank of Canada has done some simulations on this too. It's very much a business story now, an economic story.
So AI can help. It can help with things at banks like fraud detection. It can help with measuring different types of perhaps climate information. How do you see the AI story melding with this to make things greener specifically? There's a big AI story, I know, but just within this particular area to automate things in some way where it's not as polluting.
And I am optimistic about this because I'm just starting to do some of this research. I'm actually writing a book on all of this.
Oh, you are?
Yes.
What's the title going to be?
It's going to be Thrown for a Loop.
Thrown for a Loop? Oh, good.
How climate change will impact the future of work. But basically, I'm starting to delve into the AI part of this because it's new to all of us, right? And I'm optimistic because it seems like what AI is for efficiencies.
It's for efficiencies,
right.
exactly.
And this is where we're going to need efficiencies and productivity. Let's use this in the right way.
Like less people driving to work, for instance, or what would it be? I mean,
some of it's analysis, some of it's putting the plans in place. The driving to work is something we're going to come back to again and again because work from home is still controversial for a lot of companies, right?
Sure.
We went to everybody at home to 2 days a week. Now some are saying 4 days a week or come back. But I don't think you can have everybody on the highways every day in every major city and say, yeah, we're going to meet our green goals.
okay. It's an interesting point to bring into that ultimately, just, the commute and the pollute of the commute. You mentioned a bit on the annual reports, sort of how you see ultimately this starting to come into the lines of reporting within themselves. When you see a country like Canada going through interesting waves right now, I'm going to ask you about interest rates, I'm going to ask you about inflation, a macro backdrop that may be to some shaky, does it put the conversation of climate change and what we need to do about it on the back burner?
It really shouldn't. I mean,
It shouldn't, but does it?
Well, look, business cycle changes always make a difference, right? If you're trying to meet the bottom line and you have quarterly numbers coming up, you have to think twice about how you invest. I don't think that most companies are that short-sighted anymore. And I don't think as an economy we are that short-sighted. I mean, we have to have a bigger view than just that. But recessions never help things, right? We see this every time there's a recession. You get rid of skills, you get rid of people. You don't necessarily make the best long-term decisions, so it'd be better to avoid those.
Right, for sure. What sort of plans do you see or have you researched or come across in HR departments ultimately, or within, maybe not straight at the top, but just sort of the discussion of how we're going to make sure that we have the right people on board?
I think those discussions are ongoing. They're in strategic plans, and I think everyone's trying to learn. I think a lot of the discussion in the last decade or so has been about demographics, older workers, how we get through this. There's been discussion about technology and how do we restructure around this. In some cases, it's been plans about retraining or hiring what we need. I think we're early in connecting the green issues with the HR issues. We're seeing some of them, but we're still kind of early in the game.
Tell us a little bit about the state of the economy here in Canada. We are seeing globally, it looks like we're certainly in Canada, across the globe, we're into an easing cycle in a lot of the developed economies that did so much stimulation through the pandemic and caused inflation, and now we're bringing it down, it seems. Again, what does that free up, perhaps, in terms of loans, in terms of capital allocation, for some of this to take place? Like, if they're able to come back, any company is able to come back to the table and say, yes, it looks like I can borrow at a better, are they going to use some of it for a better green policy?
I'd like to think so. I'd like to think it'll be used in a lot of productive ways. I mean, there's a couple of parts to this. There's lower interest rates. There's also having your loans approved.
Sure.
And they don't always go together.
Okay, so what do you mean? Because maybe the bank is like, I don't know if that project is great.
Right, there's always caution, right? So you need to get to a certain point where you actually have the capital flowing. And I don't know how long it'll take to get there, but it's certainly not as, this doesn't sound great, not as bad an economic picture as it might have been. I don't know that we went into out-and-out recession in any of the developed countries. Certainly the US seems to have gotten through this without
Yeah.
major disruptions. Well, disruptions, but not what it might have been with rates going up as much as they did, and they're moving to an easing cycle. As you say, Canada is easing, Bank of England has cut. So hopefully we see some stimulus, some activity going into next year, and that prompts some of the big decisions.
Right, and hopefully including
the ones around environment.
Including the ones around environment, ultimately. There's a healthcare aspect to this. There's sort of a respiratory issues. It also goes to the demographic story, certainly. But again, within government policy, is there something to do there that can aid in lightening the load for healthcare and sort of but recognizing that an event like something like Jasper is going to put a massive load onto the healthcare services?
Well, I think in general, we should be shoring up our healthcare services and certainly encouraging more people to get into healthcare, but stay in healthcare too. We lose too many nurses and doctors and the like, and we're going to need them very badly. So that's part of it. The healthcare story is just a huge thing because
it is a huge thing, but this sort of piece of it, you just think like if they have to cope with more and more deadly disasters, frankly. It's a load that needs to be perhaps lessened.
We need specialists, we need more people, we need more facilities, and we needed this before there was an environmental issue, and we need this just with an aging population.
Right, interesting. Canada's a cold place to live,
It
as
is.
we know, in February. There are those that will argue it'll change the summers. There's some hot summers going on this year, certainly, across the country with some detrimental parts to it. But does it provide, on the other side of their sort of longer growing seasons? I don't know. I'm just curious if a country like Canada sees any sort of benefits from the climate change. Are there expansions of industries because of the climate change?
Well, there will be an expansion of tourism because Toronto might be hot in the summer, but it's not as hot as Rome, okay? And if you were thinking of going to Italy, you rethink that. So you look for where is cooler, and gee, is it Prince Edward Island, or is it going out to the Rockies, or whatever else? So I think we have an advantage there.
Interesting. So tourism could be an area.
Yeah, for good or bad, you have to plan for that and manage it well.
Yeah. In terms of the jobs themselves, what do you see? I know that you have a young person in your life who's probably entering the job market not so long. Are sort of friends? What are the discussions of what the younger generation wants in a company? Like what do they actually want?
They want flexibility.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I don't think they will put up with this is how it has to be. You have to be here this many hours forever. I mean, look, they will to get the first job. They will maybe to get mentored, but I don't think that that's something that's going to be feasible. It's going to be interesting because the generation managing now did not grow up thinking that work from home was even a possibility. It was very niche, right? They had one parent who asked for it maybe at a company of however many hundred. Now you have a generation that will think that's okay, and they'll also learn how to manage it, where the generation now has no idea how to manage it. They were just told, figure it out during the pandemic and shutdown. So it'll be very different in that sense. They're going to need different skills in general. Every survey from every organization, like the OECD or whatever, it says you need more soft skills, more adaptability, more creativity. I don't know that we even train for that, Pamela. I don't know.
Where did the liberal arts education go, Linda?
Yeah, and then you do need the tech skills, right? So
For sure.
It's all of it. And I don't know that we hire for it well enough. It's difficult because you just try and hire the person that fits the role. But if your company is going to keep changing, you need the person that's going to keep changing too.
There's a lot of discussion that, this was more in the US, but that colleges, post sort of secondary school education in many different areas will be driven by what companies want. That you're going to train people ultimately that are wanted by various companies and their needs for what's in the economy. Do we move the needle on that in Canada fast enough?
I think in general, training in North America has not been what it could be because there's this fear that if you train somebody, your rival is going to go take them, right? So we don't train a workforce, we train our own internal workforce. It's changed a little bit. If you look at, say, the software industry, there's a lot more training saying we're training for the sector, right? Courses that you can use other places. It's not as internal as it was, which I think is a positive. Are we at the European style
Sort of
apprenticeship?
Yeah.
We're not even close.
Okay. Do we need to be? It's also hard to fire people there.
That's
they
true.
have other labor laws.
They do.
there.
I don't want to say it's perfect there either, but let's take the things that are good.
Yeah, no, sure. Incorporate those. Absolutely. Let's get into sort of energy production, transport, manufacturing we've touched on certainly, but transport, we were talking a little bit about the commute, but a broader picture of transport. What would you like to see there? What would lead into a greener footprint ultimately for getting goods across this country?
Well, we don't have a rail system the way we used to. I don't know the exact numbers that would make it profitable to do that, but we're certainly not European in that. We don't have
big spaces to get
Yeah,
across.
for sure, absolutely. We don't have great commuter systems. I mean, look, some of them are, like you go to Vancouver, the SkyTrain scene is amazing. Toronto is okay, but generally speaking, we don't have transit set up to move anything, people or anything else the way we could. It's going to be a big debate. It is, because we can't leave things exactly as they are.
But transit systems will make things greener.
Don't? Will. I believe they will, if they're good, right?
If they're good,
People have to use them.
Right.
And they're expensive too, so that's a long discussion.
It is a long discussion. Energy production, ultimately, this goes back to sort of the emission stories of all kinds of types of energy. I mean, we're not just talking about oil, certainly, all types of energy. Just looking to reduce perhaps more in an electric way and some of the bridge energies that will be used. Do you see that moving quickly enough to basically a lower emissions environment?
I don't know that any country is going to meet the targets that have been set up by whatever agreement you look at. So I don't think Canada would be any different there. And I don't want to act like it's no big deal to do this. It is. It's expensive.
It's a big deal. Yeah.
It is. These industries are important to this country. A lot of us have our mutual funds or whatever tied up into them. So let's not be dismissive of what needs to happen. It's a big deal.
It's a big deal. But the costs are a really big deal too, to not doing them. And you sort of wonder which one will drive that.
Yeah, and again, as I say, it's a business story now. At this point, it's not about like some fringe groups talking about the environment, right? It is, can you keep doing business at the level you want to? Can you have the efficiencies? Can you not have the disruptive effects without changing things up? And I think the answer increasingly is no.
You travel around the country, you speak to people, and I'm sure they ask you questions. What are like one or two questions that you find you get asked pretty frequently or over and over again?
In terms of the environment, transition?
And the labor story within. Yeah.
The same questions you've been asking. I mean, people want to know what their kids are going to do, what this world is going to look like, and what they're going to do. I mean, is the robot going to take my job? This kind of thing. Am I going to have to work with a robot? But it's kind of funny, but at the same time, there's real fear because at this point, we're at this inflection point. And we've gone through industrial revolutions before, but never this quickly. And never with the environment also changing so quickly. So it is a unique time. And, it's fair that people are nervous about this and they want to ask sometimes about the profitability, sometimes about their investments, but also about their own livelihoods and their futures and their children's futures.
Yeah. Linda Nazareth, it's always a pleasure to speak with you. Thank you. We look forward to some articles coming out in the Globe and Mail, I think, from you as well. We'll look for those. Thanks for being here today.
Thanks so much, Pamela.
Thank you for listening to the Fidelity Connects podcast. If you haven't done so already, please subscribe to Fidelity Connects on your podcast platform of choice. And if you like what you're hearing, leave a review or a 5-star rating. Fidelity mutual funds and ETFs are available by working with a financial advisor or through an online brokerage account. Visit fidelity.ca/howtobuy for more information. Thanks again. See you next time. The views and opinions expressed on this podcast are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect those of Fidelity Investments Canada ULC or its affiliates. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be construed as investment, tax, or legal advice. It is not an offer to sell or buy, or an endorsement, recommendation, or sponsorship of any entity or security cited. Read a fund's prospectus before investing. Funds are not guaranteed. Their values change frequently, and past performance may not be repeated. Fees, expenses, and commissions are all associated with fund investments.